The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Hollow Bend, New Mexico territory. It was August 1872, and the heat shimmered off the packed earth like water on a hot skillet. The town had grown up around the copper mines, rough and raw as the ore they pulled from the ground. False-fronted buildings lined both sides of the street: the mercantile, the saloon, the sheriff's office, all weathered gray by wind and sun. Mara Callan heard them coming before she saw them. The heavy tread of boots on the jailhouse floor, the jangle of keys, the scrape of iron on iron as the cell door swung open. She didn't look up from where she sat on the narrow cot, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face. Her wrists were already raw from the shackles they'd put on her the night before. "Time to go, woman," Deputy Jake Morrison said, his voice rough with tobacco and spite. "Sheriff wants you in the square." Mara lifted her head then, and even Morrison took a half-step back at what he saw in her eyes. At 28, she was still beautiful despite the dirt and exhaustion. High cheekbones, full lips, skin kissed golden by the sun. But it was her eyes that stopped men cold, dark as mountain pools and twice as deep, with something fierce burning in their depths. "I can walk," she said, rising gracefully despite the chains. Her voice was low, controlled. "No need to drag me like a sack of grain." Morrison snorted. "After what you done, you're lucky we ain't already." "Jake," the second deputy, younger and less sure of himself, shifted nervously. "Sheriff said to bring her peaceful-like." They flanked her as they walked out into the blazing day. Word had already spread through Hollow Bend like wildfire through dry grass. Folks were gathering in the town square, leaving their shops and chores to witness whatever justice Sheriff William Garrett had planned. Mara kept her head high as they marched her down the street. She recognized faces in the growing crowd. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, old Pete from the livery stable, the Gonzalez family who ran the small cafe. Some looked away when she met their eyes. Others stared with a mixture of curiosity and righteous judgment. The town square wasn't much, just a widening of the main street around a scraggly cottonwood tree and a well. But today it had been transformed into a theater of public punishment. A post had been driven into the ground near the well, and Mara's stomach tightened when she saw the coiled whip lying beside it. Sheriff Garrett stood waiting, his considerable bulk casting a shadow in the morning light. At 52, he'd run Hollow Bend with an iron fist for near a decade. His son Thomas stood beside him, weak-chinned, pale despite the desert sun, with the petulant look of a boy who'd never been told no. "Mara Callan." The sheriff's voice boomed across the square, silencing the murmur of the crowd. "You stand accused of lying to and deceiving an upstanding member of this community." Mara almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Upstanding Thomas Garrett, who'd cornered her behind the mercantile and put his hands on her, who'd spread lies when she'd refused his suit, when she'd made it clear she'd rather work herself to death in the boarding house kitchen than be his wife. "What exactly am I accused of?" she asked, her voice carrying clear across the square. The sheriff's face darkened. "You led my boy on, made promises you had no intention of keeping. Then you spread vicious lies about his character when he proposed honorable marriage." "Honorable," Mara repeated, tasting the word like poison. "Is that what you call it when a man won't take no for an answer when he follows a woman home at night? Grabs her arms hard enough to leave bruises?" "Lies," Thomas burst out, his face flushing red. "I never touched her. She's just bitter because she knows she ain't good enough for—" "Thomas." His father's hand on his shoulder silenced him. The sheriff turned back to Mara, his expression cold as winter stone. "You've had your say. The good people of Hollow Bend know the truth. My boy offered you respectability, a good home, his name, and you spat on his generosity." The crowd was larger now, maybe 60 or 70 souls pressed in close. Mara saw sympathy in some faces, condemnation in others, but mostly she saw fear. Fear of crossing the sheriff, fear of speaking up, fear of becoming the next one tied to that post. 12 lashes, Sheriff Garrett announced, "for bearing false witness against an innocent man, for attempting to destroy a good family's reputation, for conduct unbecoming a decent woman." A ripple went through the crowd. 12 lashes was harsh, even for Hollow Bend. A man might take that for horse theft or cheating at cards, but for a woman, for the crime of refusing a marriage proposal. "This ain't right. Sheriff," a voice called out. Mara recognized Sam Chen, the Chinese launderer who'd always been kind to her. "Miss Mara ain't done nothing but work hard and mind her business. Anyone else want to speak up for this lying Jezebel?" The sheriff's hand moved to his gun belt, a gesture that wasn't lost on the crowd. "Anyone else want to call my boy a liar?" Silence fell like a shroud. Sam Chen melted back into the crowd, his face troubled but his protest silenced. They dragged Mara to the post then. Morrison and the younger deputy. She didn't fight them. What would be the point? But she didn't make it easy either, forcing them to half-carry her weight. They bound her hands to the post above her head, the rough wood pressing against her cheek. "You could end this," Thomas whispered, moving close enough that she could smell the pomade in his hair. "Just say yes. Apologize for the misunderstanding. Be my wife, and this all goes away." Mara turned her head to look at him, this boy playing at being a man, hidden behind his father's power. "I'd rather take 100 lashes than spend one night as your wife." His face contorted with rage, and for a moment she thought he might strike her himself, but his father called him back, and the moment passed. "Moses," the sheriff called, and a huge man stepped forward. Moses Washington, former slave, now the sheriff's enforcer. He did the jobs Garrett didn't want to dirty his own hands with. His face was impassive as he picked up the whip, testing its weight. 12 lashes, Garrett repeated, "and Moses makes sure she feels every one." The crowd pressed closer, some eager for the spectacle, others looking sick. Mara saw young Mary Patterson, barely 16, watching with wide eyes. She saw the mayor, studying his boots. She saw Father Miguel from the mission, his lips moving in silent prayer. "Wait!" Mara called out, her voice strong despite the fear coiling in her belly. The first person to speak since they'd tied her to the post. "I want everyone here to remember something." The sheriff made an impatient gesture, but the crowd was listening now, leaning in. "Remember this moment," Mara continued, addressing them all but looking directly at the women in the crowd. "Remember what happens when you say no to the wrong man. Remember what your silence costs, and remember who stood by and watched." She paused, then added with quiet dignity, "Go ahead, do it. Let's see who still believes you after this." The sheriff's face went purple with rage. "You heard her, Moses. She's asking for it. Give her what she wants." Moses stepped into position, the whip uncoiling like a snake. Mara pressed her forehead against the post, breathing deep. She wouldn't scream. No matter what, she wouldn't give them that satisfaction. The whip sang through the air, but the crack never came. Instead, there was the thunder of hoofbeats, the whinny of a horse pushed hard, and a voice that cut through the morning air like a blade. "Anyone touches that woman answers to me." The crowd parted like water before a stone as the rider came through. His horse was a dusty black stallion, lathered with sweat and breathing hard. The man himself sat easy in the saddle despite the wild ride, moving with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime spent more on horseback than on foot. Asher Holt. Mara had heard the name whispered in the boarding house, seen him once or twice buying supplies at the mercantile. A cattle driver who worked the long trails. They said, a man who kept to himself, who lived by his own code somewhere between the law and the lawless. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face burned brown by endless days under the sun. Maybe 35, maybe younger. It was hard to tell with men who lived hard. He swung down from his horse in one smooth motion, and Mara noticed how his hand rested easy on the colt at his hip. Not threatening, exactly, but making it clear he knew how to use it. His eyes, gray as winter storm clouds, swept over the scene, taking in the post, the whip in Moses's hand, Sheriff Garrett's purple face, and finally settling on Mara. "This a public whipping, Sheriff." His voice was quiet, but it carried, "Seems like I missed the trial." "This ain't none of your concern. Halt!" Sheriff Garrett spat. "This woman's been found guilty of—" "Found guilty by who?" Asher interrupted, still in that same quiet tone. "Judge Parker's circuit don't come through for another month. You running your own court now?" "I'm the law in Hollow Bend." The sheriff blustered. "And this lying piece of—" "Careful." The word dropped like a stone in still water. Asher's hand hadn't moved, but somehow the threat was there all the same. "That's a lady you're talking about." Thomas Garrett pushed forward, his face flushed. "She ain't no lady. She's a liar and a—" He never finished. Asher's gaze shifted to him, and Thomas actually took a step back. There was something in those gray eyes, cold and flat as a snake's, that made even the sheriff's son think twice. "Don't believe I was talking to you, boy," Asher said mildly. Then, louder, addressing the crowd. "Anybody here actually see this woman commit a crime? Anybody see her steal something? Hurt somebody? Break any real law?" Silence. Feet shuffled in the dust. Eyes found somewhere else to look. "That's what I thought?" Asher reached into his vest and pulled out a leather pouch, heavy with coin. He tossed it at the sheriff's feet, where it landed with a solid thunk. "There's $50 in gold, Mexican gold, but it spends just fine." "What are you playing at?" "Halt!" The sheriff's eyes narrowed, but he was looking at that pouch. "Simple transaction." Asher said, "I'm buying her clear of whatever debt you figure she owes. Consider it paid in full. You can't just—" "Sure I can." Asher's smile was thin as a blade. "Unless you want to explain to Judge Parker why you were fixing to whip a woman without trial. Might be he'd find that real interesting. Might be the territorial governor would too." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Everyone knew Sheriff Garrett's position depended on keeping the peace, keeping the mines running smooth, keeping complaints from reaching Santa Fe. A scandal, a formal inquiry that could end his little kingdom quick as lightning. "And what do you want with her?" Thomas demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "Why do you care what happens to some boarding house?" "I want her first night," Asher said bluntly. "That plain enough for you?" A gasp ran through the crowd. Women clutched their shawls tighter. Men shifted uneasily. Even Mara, still tied to the post, felt her stomach drop, out of the frying pan and into the fire. "But," Asher continued, and his voice carried clear, "not like this, not with her tied up like an animal, not with the whole town watching. A man wants a woman's company. He ought to ask polite, give her a choice in the matter." He walked over to the post, pulling a knife from his boot. Moses stepped back without being told, dropping the whip like it burned him. Up close, Mara could see the lines around Asher's eyes, the scar that ran through his left eyebrow, the careful way he moved, like a man who'd learned not to turn his back on anyone. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "just for her. I'm going to cut these ropes. You don't owe me nothing for it. That gold's to get them off your back, not to buy you. Understand?" She studied his face, looking for the lie, the trick, but his eyes were steady on hers, gray and calm as deep water. She nodded once. The knife was sharp. The ropes fell away, and Mara's arms dropped like lead weights. She would have fallen if Asher hadn't caught her elbow, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "This ain't over. Halt!" Sheriff Garrett growled. "You can't just ride in here and "Yeah, I can." Asher turned back to face him, keeping Mara slightly behind him. "See, unlike you, I actually know the law. False imprisonment's a federal crime, so's conspiracy to commit assault. You want to push this? We can send for a real judge. I'm betting Miss Callan here would have some interesting things to say under oath." The sheriff's jaw worked like he was chewing nails. "You're making a powerful enemy, Cowboy." Wouldn't be my first, Asher shrugged. Won't be my last. Question is, you want to make an enemy of me. I ride with Bill Watson's outfit. 20 men who'd take it real personal if something happened to me, or to anyone under my protection. It was a good bluff. Mara happened to know Bill Watson's crew had moved on to Colorado 2 weeks back, but the sheriff didn't know that, and Asher sold it like gospel truth. Get her out of here, Garrett finally snarled. But this ain't finished, not by a long shot. Never thought it was, Asher agreed mildly. He turned to Mara. Can you ride? I can manage. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Good. He whistled sharp, and his black stallion trotted over like a trained dog. Storm here's gentle as a lamb, despite his looks. You take the saddle. I'll walk alongside till we're clear of town. I can't. Mara started, then stopped. What choice did she have? Stay here and face the sheriff's revenge, at least with this stranger? She had a chance. She let him help her into the saddle, acutely aware of the watching crowd. Her dress was torn from her rough night in jail, her hair a tangled mess. But she sat straight, gathering the reins with hands that only shook a little. Anyone follows us, Asher announced to the crowd at large. I'll take it real unfriendly. Man's got a right to conduct his business in private. He took Storm's bridle and started walking, leading horse and rider through the silent crowd. People fell back to let them pass. Mara caught glimpses of faces. Sam Chen nodding slightly, Mary Patterson with tears on her cheeks, Father Miguel making the sign of the cross. They were almost clear when Thomas Garrett's voice rang out. You're nothing but a whore, you hear me? Nothing but a... Asher stopped. Didn't turn around, just stopped. Boy, he said, voice carrying back clear. You say one more word about this lady, and they'll be picking your teeth out of the dirt till Christmas. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Thomas shut up. They walked on, out of the square, past the last buildings of Hollow Bend. Only when they were well clear did Asher swing up behind her on Storm's back, his arms coming around her to take the reins. She tensed at the contact, but he kept space between them, touching her as little as possible. Where are we going? She asked as Storm picked up a steady lope. Got a place up in the hills, about an hour's ride. You'll be safe there. And then... He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's up to you, ma'am. Like I said, you don't owe me nothing, but you probably want to lay low for a spell. Let the sheriff cool down some. Why? The question burst out of her. Why did you do that? You don't even know me. She felt him shrug. Man sees something wrong. He's got two choices. Stand by and watch, or step in and stop it. I've done enough standing by in my life. They rode in silence after that, the desert spreading out around them, the mountains rising blue in the distance. Mara's mind churned with questions, fears, possibilities, out of one prison, but into what this man had saved her from a whipping, claimed her first night like she was goods for purchase. What kind of man did that make him? Behind them, a dust cloud rose on the horizon. Riders, maybe, or just the wind. Either way, there was no going back now. Whatever came next, she'd face it with her eyes open and her head high. Just like always. The sky had turned the color of old pewter by the time they reached the foothills. Heavy clouds were building over the mountains, and the air had that electric feel that promised a storm. Mara could smell it coming, that mix of dust and rain and lightning that meant the desert was about to get one of its violent summer downpours. Asher must have sensed it too. He urged Storm to a faster pace, following a trail that was barely visible through the scrub oak and juniper. They climbed steadily, leaving the flat desert behind, winding between red rock formations and stands of pine. Not much further, he said, the first words either of them had spoken in miles. Mara just nodded. She was starting to feel every bruise, every hour she'd spent in that cell. Her wrists were raw from the shackles, her muscles stiff from sitting tense in the saddle. And underneath it all, a cold knot of fear she couldn't quite shake. She'd traded the devil she knew for one she didn't, and that rarely ended well for women like her. The first fat raindrops were starting to fall when they crested a ridge, and she saw it. A small log cabin tucked back against a cliff face, with a lean-to stable and a corral. Smoke drifted from the chimney, which struck her as odd. "Someone's here," she said, tensing. "Just old Miguel," Asher replied. "He watches the place when I'm gone. Probably got supper on, knowing him." Sure enough, as they rode up, the cabin door opened and an elderly Mexican man stepped out, squinting through the gathering rain. His face split into a grin when he saw Asher. "Patron, you come back early. I have beans and—" He stopped short, noticing Mara. His eyebrows rose, but he recovered quickly, sweeping off his battered hat. "Señorita, welcome." "Miguel, this is Miss Callan," Asher said, swinging down from Storm. "She'll be staying for a while. Had some trouble in town." "Ah," Miguel's dark eyes were knowing. "The Sheriff Garrett trouble." "Something like that." Asher reached up to help Mara down. She wanted to refuse, to prove she could manage on her own. But her legs were shaking and the rain was coming harder now. She let him steady her, then quickly stepped away. "I put the horse up," Miguel offered. "You get the señorita inside before this storm breaks." They made it to the cabin just as the sky opened up. Rain hammered on the tin roof like bullets, and lightning split the dark clouds. The cabin was small but clean, one main room with a fireplace, a table and chairs, a couple of shelves with supplies. A ladder led up to what must be a loft, and a door opened onto what looked like a lean-to addition. "It's not much," Asher said, hanging his hat on a peg. "But it's dry and safe. That's my bunk up in the loft. You can have the room through there. Added it on last winter. Got a proper bed and everything." Mara stood dripping in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. Now that they were here, alone, except for the old man outside, the reality of her situation hit her like a physical blow. She was miles from anywhere, with a man who'd essentially bought her, who'd announced to the whole town he wanted her first night. Her wet dress clung to her, and she was acutely aware of how she must look: bedraggled, vulnerable, trapped. "I'm not—" she started, then stopped, lifted her chin. "I need to be clear about something. I'm grateful you got me out of there, but I won't." "I know." Asher moved to the fireplace, adding wood to the flames. He kept his back to her, giving her space. "Told you already, you don't owe me nothing. Got a sister's clothes in the trunk over there? She was about your size. You can change into something dry." Your sister, despite everything. Mara was curious. The word was flat. Final. "Trunk's there. I'll step outside. Give you privacy." He grabbed an oilskin coat and headed for the door, paused with his hand on the latch. "There's a bar for the door. Use it if it makes you feel safer. Miguel and I'll bunk in the stable if you'd rather." Then he was gone, leaving Mara alone with the firelight and the sound of rain. She stood there for a long moment, then moved to the trunk. Inside were women's clothes, simple but well-made, a blue calico dress, a wool skirt, some underthings, everything clean but with that musty smell of long storage. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was a silver hairbrush and mirror set. Mara changed quickly, her wet things making a puddle on the floor. The dress fit well enough, though it was strange wearing another woman's clothes. She wondered what had happened to Asher's sister, then decided she probably didn't want to know. When she was decent, she unbarred the door and peered out. The rain had settled into a steady downpour. She could see light from the stable, hear the low murmur of men's voices. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since yesterday. There was a pot of beans on the hearth, tortillas wrapped in cloth, a coffee pot staying warm. She helped herself, sitting at the rough table to eat. The food was simple but good, and she was halfway through her second helping when the door opened again. Asher came in alone, water streaming from his coat. He'd obviously given her time to eat in peace. Miguel's settled in the stable, he said. Stubborn old coot insists he prefers it out there. The dress. Mara gestured awkwardly. Thank you. It suits you. He poured himself coffee, took a seat across from her. Not close, she noticed, always giving her space. The color brings out your eyes. It was such a normal thing to say, the kind of compliment any man might give any woman, that it caught her off guard. Your sister, what happened to her? His face went still. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, cholera. 3 years back, she was 19. I'm sorry. Yeah. He stared into his coffee cup. Me too. They sat in silence. Rain drumming overhead. Finally. Mara couldn't stand it anymore. Why did you really help me? And don't say you saw something wrong. Men see wrong things every day and do nothing. Asher was quiet for a long moment. Then, you know what it's like to watch someone get railroaded, to see them punished for something that ain't their fault, and not be able to stop it. Your sister, among others. He stood abruptly, moved to the window. Lightning illuminated his profile, strong nose, firm jaw, eyes that had seen too much. Jenny, my sister, she fell in love with a married man. Didn't know he was married till it was too late. When his wife found out, she raised hell. Had Jenny brought up before the town council, called her all kinds of names. They were going to brand her, mark her face so everyone would know she was a fallen woman. Mara's hand went to her own cheek involuntarily. I was away, driving cattle to Kansas. By the time I got back, he shrugged. They didn't brand her. The cholera got her first. But she died with the whole town thinking she was something she wasn't. Died alone because decent folks wouldn't tend her. So today, when you saw the same damn thing, different town, same small minds, same men using their power to punish a woman for not doing what they want. He turned back to her. I couldn't save Jenny, but I could stop them from putting marks on you. The simple honesty of it made her throat tight. She'd expected excuses, justifications, maybe even threats. Not this quiet admission of old pain and present principle. What you said about wanting... She couldn't finish. Had to say something they'd understand. Money talks to men like Garrett, but it don't buy respect. They had to think I had a reason they could grasp. A man wanting a woman that they get. A man standing on principle. He shook his head. That just makes you a target. So you don't... No. The word was firm. I don't want nothing from you except maybe to see you safe. You can stay here till you figure out your next move. Week, month. Whatever you need. When you're ready to move on, I'll take you wherever you want to go. No strings. And if I said I wanted to leave right now? Then I'd saddle Storm and take you anywhere the rain'll let us reach. He met her eyes steady. Your choice. Always your choice. Mara studied him. This quiet man who'd upended his life for a stranger. She thought about the sheriff's face, about Thomas's grabbing hands, about all the times she'd had no choices at all. The rain's pretty bad, she said finally. Guess I'll stay the night, see how things look in the morning. Something in Asher's shoulders relaxed. Fair enough. The room's yours. Like I said, there's a bar for the door. Use it. She stood, suddenly exhausted. At the doorway to the small room, she paused. Asher, thank you for all of it. Get some rest, was all he said. Tomorrow's soon enough to figure out the rest. The room was simple, a narrow bed with a colorful quilt, a washstand, a small window. Mara barred the door, then sat on the bed, listening to the rain. Through the thin wall, she could hear Asher moving around, banking the fire, settling in for the night. For the first time in days, maybe months, she felt something like safe. It wouldn't last, she knew. The sheriff wouldn't let this go. And trusting this stranger, this grieving brother who saw his sister in every wronged woman, that was its own kind of danger. But for tonight, with the rain washing the world clean and a barred door between her and any threat, Mara Callan let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a refuge in the storm. The morning came clear and bright. Yesterday's storm leaving the air clean and sharp as fresh-cut glass. Mara woke to the sound of a hammer striking metal. Rhythmic, patient, steady. She lay still for a moment, orienting herself. The narrow bed, the barred door, the events of yesterday flooding back like a bitter tide. She dressed quickly in the blue calico, braided her hair with fingers since she couldn't bring herself to use the silver brush that had belonged to a dead girl. When she finally unbarred the door and stepped into the main room, she found it empty. Coffee was hot on the stove, biscuits and jam on the table, but no sign of Asher. Through the window, she could see him by a small forge set up near the stable, mending what looked like wagon hardware. Old Miguel sat nearby on a stump, smoking a pipe and talking. The normality of it, two men working in the morning sun, made her chest tight with something she couldn't name. She poured coffee, took it outside. Both men looked up as she approached. "Morning, señorita," Miguel said warmly. "You sleep good." "Yes, thank you." She wasn't sure what else to say. How to navigate this strange new world where she was neither prisoner nor guest. Asher straightened from the forge, wiping sweat from his brow. "Morning. There's breakfast inside if you're hungry." Thank you." She sipped her coffee, watching him work. His movements were economical, practiced. "What are you making?" "Fixing a broken hinge. Ranch work means something always needs mending." He glanced at her. "You know anything about keeping house?" The question surprised her. "I've been working in boarding houses since I was 15, cooking, cleaning, mending, washing." "Good. Then you'll go stir crazy inside a week with nothing to do." He nodded toward the cabin. "Place could use a woman's touch. Haven't done more than basic cleaning since—" He trailed off. "Since your sister died," Mara finished quietly. "Yeah." He went back to his hammering. "Point is, you want to earn your keep while you're here. There's plenty needs doing, but that's your choice. You're not a servant." "I'd like to be useful," she said carefully. "I don't take charity well." Miguel chuckled. "Ah, a proud one. Good. The patron. He needs someone who will stand up to him. He's too used to being alone." "Miguel," Asher warned, but there was no heat in it. Over the next days, a routine developed. Mara took over the cooking and housekeeping, finding a strange comfort in the familiar tasks. The cabin hadn't been properly cleaned in months, maybe longer. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, beat dust from the rugs. She found Jenny's things tucked away in corners, a book of poetry, hair ribbons, a half-finished sampler, each item a small grief, carefully preserved. Asher was gone during the days, working cattle, mending fences, all the endless tasks of running a small ranch. Miguel came and went, sometimes staying for meals, sometimes disappearing to his own cabin further up the valley. In the evenings, they'd eat together, Asher telling stories of the cattle drives, Miguel spinning tales of the old days when the Spanish still ruled. It was on the fourth morning that Mara found the pattern. She was cleaning the loft where Asher slept, changing the bedding, when she noticed marks carved into the wall by his bed. Tiny lines, grouped in fives, counting. She traced them with her finger. 23 groups, 115 days. "That's how long Jenny was sick." Asher's voice came from below. She hadn't heard him come in. "Kept thinking if I could just make it one more day." She turned the corner. Mara climbed down the ladder, faced him. "I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to pry." "Nothing to be sorry for." He sat heavily at the table. "Can't ask you to clean and then get upset when you find things." She poured him coffee, a gesture that had become automatic. "Tell me about her." "Why?" "Because I'm wearing her clothes, sleeping in what was probably her room, using her things. Feels like I should know who she was." Asher was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Jenny was light. That's the best way I can describe her. She laughed at everything, sang while she worked, even the dirtiest chores. Could make friends with anyone. Mexican, Indian, Chinese, didn't matter to her. She sounds wonderful. She was too wonderful for this hard country, too trusting. His jaw tightened. Man who ruined her was a traveling merchant. Samuel Morse sold her ribbons and dreams, told her he'd marry her when his business was settled. She believed him. And you couldn't protect her from that. I was her older brother. It was my job to protect her. I failed. The words were flat, matter of fact, which somehow made them worse. Mara sat across from him. She was 19, a grown woman. You can't protect people from their own hearts. Can't I? He looked at her then, really looked at her. What am I doing with you, if not trying to protect someone from the world's cruelty? That's different. Is it? They stared at each other across the rough wood table. Mara felt something shift between them, some wall cracking just a little. I'm not your sister, she said softly. I'm not looking for someone to save me. I've been saving myself for years. I know. He stood abruptly. I need to check the fence lines. But he paused at the door. Jenny would have liked you. You've got the same steel in your spine she had, before they broke her. That afternoon, while Asher was gone, Mara explored more of the cabin. In a trunk under the window, she found photographs. Asher, younger and less worn, standing with a laughing girl who had his same dark hair but none of his shadows. Jenny. It had to be. There were letters, too, tied with ribbon. She didn't read them, but she saw the signature on one, Your devoted Samuel. She was putting them back when she found the newspaper clipping. Yellow with age. Local woman dies of cholera. A small article. Clinical in its brevity. Jennifer Holt, age 19. No surviving family except a brother away on business. No one would nurse her. Miguel's voice came from the doorway. The patron. He came home to find her already buried. The town wouldn't even tell him where at first. Said she didn't deserve a Christian burial. Mara's hands clenched on the clipping. Because she loved the wrong man. Because she was a woman who loved it all, Miguel said sadly. In towns like that, like Hollow Bend, that is crime enough. That evening, Asher came back with a deep cut on his arm from barbed wire. He tried to wave off Mara's concern, but she insisted on cleaning and bandaging it. Hold still, she ordered, dabbing at the wound with whiskey. Yes, ma'am. There was almost a smile in his voice. You're terrible at taking care of yourself, she muttered, wrapping clean cloth around his arm. Never had anyone to fuss before. Well, now you do, at least while I'm here. The words came out before she could stop them. His hand covered hers on the bandage, just for a moment, warm and calloused. Thank you. She pulled away, busied herself putting supplies back. It's nothing. Can't have you bleeding all over the clean floors. But that night, as she lay in the narrow bed listening to him move around overhead, she thought about that moment, the warmth of his hand, the way he'd said thank you like it meant more than just the bandaging. She thought about Jenny, dying alone because she dared to love, about herself, nearly whipped because she dared to refuse, about all the women in all the small towns, trapped between what they wanted and what they were allowed. And she thought about Asher Holt, trying to save every woman he met because he couldn't save the one who mattered most. The wall inside her, the one she'd built stone by stone over years of disappointment and survival, cracked a little more. Not enough to let anyone in. Not yet, but enough to let a little light through. Enough to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to choose to stay. The afternoon was hot and still, the kind of day where even the flies seemed too lazy to buzz. Mara had taken to doing the washing early, before the sun got too high, but she'd found a torn shirt of Asher's that needed mending and lost track of time. Now she sat on the porch, needle flashing in the bright light, when she heard the shots, 3 of them, sharp and close together, echoing off the canyon walls. She was on her feet instantly. the shirt forgotten. Asher had ridden out after breakfast to check on some cattle in the north pasture. The shots had come from that direction. More shots, then silence. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. She ran to the cabin, grabbed the old Spencer rifle from above the door. She'd never fired it, but she'd seen Asher clean it, knew it was loaded. Without thinking, she hiked up her skirts and started running toward the sound. She found him by the creek, his horse dancing nervously nearby. He was on one knee behind a fallen log, his Colt in his hand, watching the brush on the far bank. "Get down," he hissed when he saw her. She dropped beside him, clutching the rifle. "What is it?" "Mountain cat, spooked storm, went after one of the calves." He glanced at her, and she saw surprise flicker across his face. "You came running toward gunfire." "I thought," she swallowed, "I thought you might be hurt." Something shifted in his expression. "Can you shoot?" "I've never tried." "Then today's your lesson. Cat's wounded, probably holed up in those rocks. Can't leave it to suffer. Can't get close enough for a clean pistol shot." He took the Spencer from her, checked the load. "Here, tuck it tight against your shoulder, like this." He moved behind her, positioning the rifle, his arms coming around to guide her hands. "See that white rock line up the sights on it?" Mara was acutely aware of him pressed against her back, his breath warm on her neck. The rifle was heavy, but his hands steadied hers. "Breathe in," he said quietly. "Now out, slow, at the bottom of your breath. Squeeze gentle. Don't jerk it." She did as he said. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the crack of it leaving her ears ringing. Dust puffed up a foot left of the rock. "Not bad," Asher said. She could hear the smile in his voice. "Again, adjust right a hair." The second shot was closer. The third hit dead center. "Natural-born markswoman," he said, but he didn't move away. They stayed like that for a heartbeat. 2, his arms still around her. Then he cleared his throat, stepped back. "Let me finish with the cat. You keep the rifle ready, just in case." He worked his way carefully upstream, using the rocks for cover. Mara watched, rifle ready, heart still racing but not from fear now. When he finally got a clear shot, it was quick and clean. Mercy, not violence. Walking back to the cabin, he carried the rifle. She led Storm. The silence between them was different now, charged with something unnamed. "Thank you," he said finally, "for coming. Most folks run away from gunfire, not toward it." "I'm not most folks." "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not." Back at the cabin, he set up targets. Old cans on fence posts. "Might as well learn proper, since you've got the eye for it." They spent the afternoon shooting. He was a patient teacher, correcting her stance, her grip, her breathing, never touching more than necessary. But each contact sending little shocks through her. When she hit 6 cans in a row, she actually laughed. A real laugh. Surprised out of her. "I did it." "You did." He was grinning, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, lighter. "Jenny was a good shot, too. I taught her when she was just 12. Used to say she'd never need a man to protect her if she could protect herself." The mention of Jenny should have darkened the moment, but it didn't. It felt like sharing, not sorrow. "Bet she was a better student than me," Mara said. "Different. She was fearless but careless. You're careful but brave. There's a difference." As the sun started sinking, painting the mountains red and gold, he showed her how to clean the rifle. They sat on the porch, working in companionable silence. Miguel had gone to town for supplies. Wouldn't be back until tomorrow. It was just the two of them and the vast quiet of the desert evening. "Asher," Mara said suddenly, "what you said about your sister, about failing to protect her, that wasn't your fault." His hand stilled on the rifle barrel. "Wasn't it?" "No." She set down the cleaning rod, turned to face him. "I've been thinking about it, about her, about all of us. You want to know what kills women like Jenny, like me? It's not men like Samuel Morse. They're just the weapon. It's the shame, the isolation, the way everyone turns their back once you're marked as ruined. He was watching her intently now, gray eyes unreadable in the fading light. Your sister died alone because the town decided she wasn't worth saving. That's not on you. That's on them. Every single person who could have helped and chose not to. I should have been there. You can't be everywhere. You can't save everyone. She reached out, covered his hand with hers. But you saved me. That matters. He turned his hand palm up, laced his fingers with hers. Just holding. Nothing more. Do you ever wonder why some folks make it and others don't? Every day. What's the difference? Mara thought about it. Maybe it's finding one person who sees you as human when the rest of the world doesn't. Maybe that's enough to tip the scales. Jenny had me. Jenny had a brother 1,000 miles away. I have... She stopped, suddenly uncertain. You have... His voice was soft, encouraging. I have a man who handed me a rifle instead of locking me away, who teaches instead of taking, who sees me as someone worth saving but also capable of saving myself. The sun was almost gone now, the first stars appearing. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Mara, Asher said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a question and an answer all at once. She squeezed his hand, then let go and stood. I should start supper. Yeah, but he caught her wrist as she passed. Gentle, for what it's worth. You've got me, long as you need, longer if you want. She looked down at him, this complex man with his grief and his honor and his careful hands. That's worth a lot, she said softly. Inside, lighting the lamps, starting the stove, she could feel the smile tugging at her lips. Her first real smile in so long she'd almost forgotten the shape of it. When she glanced out the window, he was still on the porch, silhouetted against the dying light, cleaning that rifle like it was the most important task in the world. She touched the window pane, watching him. The wall inside her wasn't just cracked now. Whole sections were crumbling. Dangerous. That walls were there for a reason. But maybe, just maybe, some walls were meant to come down. When he finally came in for supper, she'd made his favorite venison stew with wild onions and fresh bread. He looked at the spread, then at her. What's the occasion? No occasion. She served him, then herself. Just thought you deserved something nice. You're a good teacher. You're a good student. They ate quietly, but the silence was warm, comfortable. When their eyes met across the table, she didn't look away. Neither did he. Later, washing dishes side by side, their hands brushed in the soapy water. Once, twice, the third time. He caught her hand under the suds, held it for just a moment. She felt that touch all the way to her bones. Getting late, she said finally, voice not quite steady. Yeah, but neither of them moved. They stood there, hands in cooling dishwater, looking at each other like they were seeing something new, something possible. Then storm whinnied outside, breaking the spell, and they stepped apart. Mara dried her hands, moved toward her room. Mara, he called softly. Thank you for running toward the gunfire. No one's done that for me in a long time. She paused in the doorway. Thank you for making sure I could shoot back. That night, lying in the dark, she could still feel the ghost of his arms around her, teaching her to aim, could still see his real smile, rare as desert rain, could still feel the shape of her own smile, foreign but welcome on her face. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without barring the door. The rider came at dawn, when the valley was still wrapped in mist and the coffee had just started perking. Mara saw him first through the kitchen window, a lone figure picking his way down the trail, careful and deliberate. Something about the way he sat his horse made her stomach tighten. Asher, she called quietly. Someone's coming. He was beside her in an instant, peering out, His jaw tightened. "That's Jake Morrison, deputy from Hollow Bend." They watched Morrison approach. He stopped well short of the cabin, keeping his hands visible. Smart man. Asher had made his position clear, and everyone knew he could shoot the eye out of a needle at 50 paces. "Wait inside," Asher said, checking his Colt. "No." Mara lifted her chin. "Whatever he's brought, it concerns me. I'll face it." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Together, then." They stepped onto the porch as Morrison dismounted. The deputy looked tired, dust covered from the ride. He kept his movements slow, unthreatening. "Holt," he said by way of greeting, then touching his hat brim. "Miss Callan." "State your business, Morrison," Asher said flatly. The deputy reached slowly into his vest, pulled out an envelope. "Letter from Sheriff Garrett. He wanted it delivered personal-like." "We don't want," Asher started, but Mara put a hand on his arm. "I'll take it," she said. Morrison rode forward just enough to hand it over, then backed his horse away again. "I'm supposed to wait for an answer." Mara broke the seal, unfolded the single sheet. Her face gave nothing away as she read, but Asher saw her knuckles whiten where she gripped the paper. "What's it say?" he asked quietly. She handed it to him, her voice steady. "He's offering me a choice. Return to Hollow Bend to clarify the misunderstanding before Judge Parker arrives next month, or he'll put out a territorial warrant for theft." "Theft?" Asher's voice was dangerous. "What theft?" Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff says she took money from the boarding house, from the cash box." "That's a lie," Mara said calmly. "Mrs. Henderson gave me my wages fair and square, $2.40 for 2 weeks' work. Sheriff says it was $20 missing. Then the sheriff's a liar as well as a bully." Her voice never rose, but Morrison flinched like she'd shouted. Asher stepped forward. "You ride back and tell Garrett this Miss Callan will return to Hollow Bend when she's good and ready. If he wants to make accusations, he can make them to Judge Parker's face. And if I see one wanted poster, one bounty hunter, one man who even looks sideways at her, I'll come to Hollow Bend myself. He won't like that." Morrison swallowed hard. "I'll tell him, but Holt, he's serious about this. He's got witnesses willing to swear she took that money." "Bought witnesses," Mara said quietly. "How much did he pay them, or did he just threaten them like he threatened me?" The deputy had the grace to look ashamed. "I just deliver messages, ma'am. I wasn't there that day in the square. If I had been, you'd have done nothing, just like everyone else." She finished for him, but not unkindly. "We all do what we must to survive. Mr. Morrison." He turned his horse to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, ma'am, not everyone in town believes the sheriff's version. Mrs. Henderson speaks well of you. So does Sam Chen. Even Father Miguel's been asking questions." "Tell them thank you," Mara said. "But tell them quiet-like. No sense in them risking the sheriff's anger." After Morrison left, they stood on the porch watching his dust trail fade. Asher was the first to speak. "He's trying to force your hand, make you run or make you come back on his terms." "I know." She wrapped her arms around herself despite the warming day. "A territorial warrant means I couldn't go anywhere, couldn't start over. I'd be looking over my shoulder forever. We won't let that happen." She turned to him, a sad smile touching her lips. "This isn't your fight. Asher, you've done enough, more than enough. Maybe it's time I moved on before I bring more trouble to your door." "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. He gentled his voice. "Mara, no, you don't run from this. We face it. And if facing it means you get hurt or killed, the sheriff's not above ambush, not above hiring guns. I've faced worse than William Garrett. For your sister, maybe for family, but I'm not." "Aren't you?" He caught her shoulders, turned her to face him fully. You've been here 3 weeks. You've turned this place from a house into a home. You talk to Jenny's picture when you think I'm not looking. You hum while you cook, just like she did. You ran toward gunfire because you thought I might be hurt. His hands gentled on her shoulders, thumbs brushing the fabric of her dress. You're not my sister. God knows I don't think of you like a sister, but you're... I'm what? Her voice was barely a whisper. You're someone worth fighting for, someone worth standing with against all the Sheriff Garretts of the world. He released her, stepped back. Unless you don't want me to. Unless you'd rather face this alone. I've been alone a long time, she said softly. I'm good at alone. It's safe. No one can disappoint you if you don't let them close enough to try. That's no way to live, says the man who carved his sister's sick days into the wall, who keeps her room like a shrine, who saves strange women because he couldn't save her. The words should have stung, but Asher heard the pain behind them, the fear. Maybe we're both hiding, he admitted. Maybe we're both using the past as an excuse not to risk the future. But Mara, I'd rather risk it with you than keep hiding alone. She looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd become so much more than a rescuer, who'd become friend and protector and something else, something nameless but powerful. I need to think, she said finally. I need... time, he finished. I know. Take all you need. I'll be checking the south fence if you need me. He left her there, standing in the morning sun. She watched him saddle storm, watched him ride out, careful not to look back, giving her space, like always. Inside, she found herself in Jenny's room, her room now. The silver brush sat on the dresser where she'd finally placed it last week. She picked it up, ran her fingers over the engraved JH on the back. What would you do? She asked the empty room. Would you run? Would you fight? Would you trust him? No answer came, but as she stood there, she noticed something she'd missed before, a small daguerreotype tucked behind the mirror. Jenny and Asher, younger, smiling. But there was a third person, cut mostly out of frame. All that showed was a hand on Jenny's shoulder, the edge of a dark sleeve. She pulled the picture free, studied it. On the back, in faded ink, Jenny, Asher, and Sam. June 1869. Samuel, the traveling merchant who'd broken Jenny's heart. Mara sank onto the bed, understanding flooding through her. Asher had known the man who'd ruined his sister. They'd been friends, from the look of it. The betrayal wasn't just Jenny's, it was his too. And yet he'd trusted again, trusted her, opened his home, shared his grief, offered his protection without asking anything in return. Outside, she heard Miguel arriving, singing one of his Spanish songs, normal sounds of a normal day. But nothing was normal anymore. She had a choice to make. Run and confirm everyone's worst assumptions about her. Return to Hollow Bend and risk the sheriff's rigged justice. Or stay and fight, with a man who'd proven that not all of them were like Thomas Garrett or Samuel Morse. A man who handed her a rifle instead of a cage. She rose, tucked the photograph back where she'd found it. Some secrets weren't hers to uncover. Some trust had to be earned. In the main room, she found paper and ink. Her hand was steady as she wrote. Sheriff Garrett, I received your letter. I have taken nothing that wasn't mine by right. If you wish to make false accusations, you may do so before Judge Parker. I will return to Hollow Bend when the circuit judge arrives. Not before. I will answer any legitimate questions in a court of law, not in your kangaroo court. Until then, I remain Mara Callan. She sealed it, set it aside for Morrison's return tomorrow. Then she started making bread, kneading the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. By the time Asher returned for lunch, she had her answer ready. I'll stay, she said simply. I'll fight, but not alone, not anymore. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long, dark night. Good, was all he said, but his hand found hers across the table, warm and sure and steady. And for the first time in her life, Mara Callan thought maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth fighting for too. The morning they rode back to Hollow Bend, the sky was the color of old copper, promising another scorching day. Mara sat straight in the saddle of the bay mare Asher had bought from Miguel's cousin. "A lady needs her own horse," he'd said simply when she'd protested the expense. She wore a new dress, forest green that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes, sewn from fabric Asher had quietly purchased on his last supply run. Her hair was pinned up neat and proper, and at her hip hung something that would have shocked the good people of Hollow Bend. A Colt .32 small enough for a woman's hand, but deadly enough in trained fingers. "You don't have to do this," Asher said for the third time since dawn. He rode beside her on Storm, rifle across his saddle, watching the trail ahead with wary eyes. "Yes, I do." Her voice was calm as deep water. "Judge Parker arrives tomorrow. If I don't show, Garrett wins by default." Behind them rode Miguel and 3 of his nephews, vaqueros, who'd appeared that morning, armed and silent. "Family helps family," was all Miguel had said when Asher protested. "And the señorita, she is family now." The town appeared before noon, shimmering in the heat like a mirage. But the usually sleepy Main Street was crowded. Word had spread that Mara Callan was returning, and everyone wanted to see what would happen when she faced the sheriff. "Chin up," Asher murmured. "Show them who you really are." They rode down Main Street at a walk, letting people get a good look. Mara on her mare, back straight as a ramrod, eyes forward. Not the frightened woman they'd last seen bound for a whipping, but something else entirely, something that made them whisper and stare. They stopped at the church. Father Miguel, the priest, not their Miguel, stood on the steps, and his face brightened when he saw them. "Miss Callan," he said, coming forward. "I'm glad you've returned. There are things that must be said, truths that must be told." "Father," Sheriff Garrett's voice cut across the square like a whip. He stood outside his office, Thomas at his side, both armed. "That woman is under arrest for theft. Don't interfere with the law." "The only law I recognize comes tomorrow with Judge Parker," the priest replied calmly. "Until then, Miss Callan is under the protection of the church." A murmur ran through the crowd. Taking sanctuary was an old tradition, one even Garrett couldn't easily break. "Protection of the church," Thomas sneered. "For a lying thief and worse." "That's when Mrs. Henderson pushed through the crowd. The boarding house owner was a thin, nervous woman who'd never stood up to anyone in her life. But she climbed those church steps like she was climbing a mountain, and turned to face the crowd. "I have something to say," she announced, voice shaking but determined. "About the money that went missing." "Mrs. Henderson," the sheriff warned. "You already gave your statement." "I gave the statement you told me to give," she corrected, and the crowd gasped. "You said if I didn't agree that Mara took that money, you'd close my boarding house for health violations. You said I'd lose everything." "That's a lie." Thomas started forward, but stopped when Asher's hand dropped to his gun. "Is it?" Another voice from the crowd. Sam Chen stepped out, his usual humble demeanor replaced by quiet dignity. "Because the sheriff told me the same thing about my laundry. Said he'd run me out of town if I didn't stay quiet about what I saw that night." "What did you see?" Father Miguel asked gently. "I saw Thomas Garrett follow Miss Mara home, saw him grab her, try to force her into the alley, saw her fight him off and run." He looked directly at Thomas. "Saw him kick over a rain barrel in anger and swear he'd make her pay." More murmurs, louder now. The crowd was growing, drawing people from shops and saloons. Mara recognized faces, some sympathetic, some hostile, most simply curious. "Enough of this," Sheriff Garrett roared. "I'm the law here, Morrison. Arrest that woman." Deputy Morrison stood frozen, looking between the sheriff and the growing crowd. "Sheriff, maybe we should wait for the judge." "I said arrest her." That's when Mara spoke, her voice carrying clear across the square. "On what charge? Sheriff refusing your son, fighting back when he wouldn't take no for an answer, or simply being a woman who won't bow to your bullying?" She dismounted gracefully, handed her reins to Miguel, and walked up the church steps. At the top, she turned to face the town. "You all watched," she said, and her voice was steel-wrapped in velvet. "3 weeks ago, you watched this man try to have me whipped for the crime of refusing his son. You stayed silent out of fear. I understand that. Fear is powerful." She paused, let her gaze sweep the crowd. "But silence has a cost. How many other women has Thomas Garrett cornered? How many other people has the sheriff threatened into submission? How long will you let fear rule this town?" "She's lying," Thomas screamed. "She's nothing but a—" The gunshot cut him off. Not from Asher, who stood steady and watchful. Not from the sheriff, whose hand had barely touched his weapon, but from someone in the crowd. A single shot that kicked up dust at Thomas's feet and sent him stumbling backward. Everyone turned to see Mary Patterson, barely 17, holding an old Navy revolver with shaking hands. Tears streamed down her face. "She's not lying," Mary said, voice breaking. "He did the same to me, last Christmas dance. Followed me outside, put his hands on me, said if I told anyone, my father would lose his job at the bank." Her father, James Patterson, pushed through to reach her. His face went from shock to rage as he processed his daughter's words. "Mary, why didn't you—" "Because you need that job," she sobbed. "Because the sheriff owns half the town. Because who'd believe me?" "I would," another voice called. Mrs. Rodriguez, who ran the seamstress shop. "He came after my daughter, too. We left town for a month, said it was to visit family, but really—" One by one, they came forward. Women with stories, men who'd been threatened, business owners who'd paid protection to keep their shops open. The dam of silence, once cracked, burst completely. Sheriff Garrett's face had gone from red to purple to a dangerous white. His hand moved for his gun, but froze when he found Asher's Colt already drawn and aimed steady at his chest. "Go ahead," Asher said quietly. "Give me a reason." "You're all going to regret this," the sheriff snarled. "When Judge Parker gets here." "When Judge Parker gets here," a new voice interrupted. "He'll find a town ready to testify about years of corruption and abuse of power." Everyone turned. A well-dressed man stepped out of the hotel, followed by 2 federal marshals. "I'm Andrew Latimer, territorial prosecutor. We received word about troubles in Hollow Bend and came a day early." He looked at the sheriff with cold eyes. "I think we've heard enough to warrant a full investigation." What happened next was almost anticlimactic. The marshals took the sheriff and Thomas into custody. Morrison, looking relieved, handed over his badge and offered to testify. The crowd, finding courage in numbers, began sharing stories they'd kept buried for years. Through it all, Mara stood on the church steps, Asher beside her. When it was over, when the sheriff and his son were locked in their own jail awaiting transport, she finally let herself lean against him, just slightly. "You did it," he said quietly. "You stood up, and they found their courage." "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done it alone." Mrs. Henderson approached, wringing her hands. "Miss Mara, I'm so sorry. I should have spoken up sooner. Can you forgive me?" Mara took the older woman's hands. "We all do what we must to survive. What matters is that you spoke up when it counted." As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the town square slowly emptied. People drifted back to their lives. But something had changed. The fear that had gripped Hollow Bend for so long was broken. "What now?" Asher asked as they walked toward the hotel where they'd taken rooms for the night. Mara looked around the town that had tried to break her. "Now we testify tomorrow. We make sure justice is done. And then, she looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, Her smile was completely unguarded. Then we go home. We have a ranch to run. After all, His voice was carefully neutral, but she saw the hope in his eyes. If you'll have me as a partner, in the ranch, in everything. He stopped walking, turned to face her fully. Mara Callan, are you proposing a business arrangement? I'm proposing, she said, heart hammering but voice steady, that two people who've been alone too long might be stronger together. That maybe it's time to stop living in the past and start building a future. His hands framed her face, gentle as always. That's the best proposition I've heard in a long time. There on Main Street, in full view of whoever cared to look, Asher Holt kissed Mara Callan. Not a claiming kiss, not a desperate one, but something better, a promise, a beginning. When they broke apart, the stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Home, Mara said softly, tasting the word like something new. I like the sound of that. So do I, Asher agreed, taking her hand. So do I. The crack of the gavel echoed through the packed courthouse as Judge Parker called for order. He was a stern man with steel-gray whiskers and eyes that seemed to see right through to a person's soul. The territorial prosecutor, Andrew Latimer, had spent the morning laying out the evidence against Sheriff Garrett and his son, and now it was time for testimony. Miss Callan, Judge Parker said, his voice carrying the authority of federal law. Please take the stand. Mara rose from her seat beside Asher, smoothing her green dress. She'd been up since before dawn, nerves making sleep impossible, but you'd never know it from her steady walk to the witness chair. The courtroom was full to bursting. It seemed every soul in Hollow Bend had come to watch justice finally being served. State your name for the record, Latimer instructed. Mara Callan. Miss Callan, please tell the court about the events leading up to the attempted public punishment 3 weeks ago. Mara's voice was clear and steady as she recounted it all. Thomas's unwanted advances, his anger at her refusal, the false accusations, the night in jail, the moment they'd dragged her to the square. And what would have happened if Mr. Holt hadn't intervened? Latimer asked. I would have been whipped, publicly humiliated, marked as a woman of low character. She met Thomas's angry glare without flinching. All for the crime of saying no. Sheriff Garrett's lawyer, a sweating man named Phelps, brought in from Santa Fe, stood for cross-examination. Miss Callan, isn't it true you were employed at a boarding house of questionable reputation? I worked in Mrs. Henderson's boarding house as a cook and cleaner. Mara replied evenly. It's a respectable establishment that serves minors and traveling families. But you lived there unmarried, unchaperoned. Objection, Latimer cut in. Miss Callan's living arrangements have no bearing on whether she was falsely accused and nearly subjected to illegal punishment. Sustained. Judge Parker ruled. Mr. Phelps, stick to the facts of the case. Phelps tried several more times to paint Mara as a loose woman who'd led Thomas on, but each attempt fell flat against her composed responses. When he finally gave up, she was allowed to step down. One by one, others took the stand. Mrs. Henderson, hands shaking but voice firm, admitted to being coerced into false testimony. Sam Chen described what he'd seen that night. Mary Patterson, supported by her father, told her story with quiet dignity that left many in the courtroom wiping their eyes. But the most damning testimony came from Deputy Morrison, who'd kept detailed notes of the sheriff's questionable activities over the years. Forced collections, threats against business owners, using his position to silence anyone who opposed him. I was a coward. Morrison admitted from the stand. I saw wrong being done and did nothing. But when I saw them getting ready to whip an innocent woman, I knew if I didn't speak up then, I never would. Through it all, Sheriff Garrett sat red-faced and seething, while Thomas alternated between sullen silence and muttered curses. Their lawyer grew more desperate as the day wore on. finally resorting to challenging Asher when he took the stand. Mr. Holt, isn't it true you paid $50 for Miss Callan's company? Phelps asked with an oily smile. That you announced before the whole town you wanted her first night. Asher's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. I paid $50 to stop an illegal punishment. As for what I said, I needed to give them a reason they'd understand. Men like Garrett don't recognize decency as motivation. So you lied. I gave them an excuse to back down without losing face. Asher's gray eyes were steady. Would you prefer I'd let them whip an innocent woman? And this relationship with Miss Callan? It's purely platonic. Asher glanced at Mara, and something passed between them that made her cheeks warm. My relationship with Miss Callan is based on mutual respect and affection, which is more than Thomas Garrett can say. That brought a ripple of agreement through the courtroom. Judge Parker had to bang his gavel again. When all testimony was complete, Judge Parker retired to consider his verdict. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations, but Mara sat quiet, Asher's hand covering hers on the bench. Whatever happens, he murmured, we faced it together. Together, she agreed, turning her hand to lace their fingers. Judge Parker returned after an hour, his expression grave. The courtroom fell silent. William Garrett, he began. This court finds you guilty of gross abuse of power, false imprisonment, conspiracy to commit assault, and extortion. You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison at Santa Fe. A gasp ran through the crowd. The sheriff shot to his feet. You can't do this. I am the law in Hollow Bend. Not anymore. Judge Parker said coldly. Marshal, remove him. As they dragged the cursing sheriff away, the judge turned to Thomas. Thomas Garrett, you are found guilty of attempted assault and conspiracy. 18 months in territorial prison. Perhaps time behind bars will teach you what no means. Thomas went white. But I didn't actually... Only because Miss Callan fought you off. The judge interrupted. Your intentions were clear. Marshal, take him away. As father and son were led out in shackles, Judge Parker addressed the courtroom. Let this be a lesson. No man is above the law. No matter his position, the federal government will not tolerate the abuse of citizens, especially the vulnerable among us. He looked directly at Mara. Miss Callan, this court owes you an apology. What was done to you was a grave injustice. Your courage in returning to face your accusers has freed this town from tyranny. Mara stood, steady despite the emotions coursing through her. Thank you, Your Honor. I only wanted the truth to be heard. And heard it was. The judge's stern face softened slightly. This court is dismissed. The courtroom erupted in cheers and conversation. People pressed forward to shake Mara's hand, to apologize, to thank her. She accepted it all graciously, but Asher could see the toll it was taking. When he caught her eye, she nodded slightly. If you'll excuse us, he said to the well-wishers. It's been a long day. He guided her outside, where the late afternoon sun was painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. They walked in silence to the livery stable where their horses waited, but as Asher started to saddle Storm, Morrison appeared. Miss Callan, Mr. Holt, he said, hat in hand. I wanted to say, well, to thank you, and to tell you that the town council met during the trial. They've asked me to serve as interim sheriff until a proper election can be held. You'll do fine, Morrison, Asher said. You've got the backbone for it when you choose to use it. Morrison flushed at the backhanded compliment. There's one more thing. He pulled out a cloth bag, handed it to Mara. The council voted. This is compensation for your wrongful imprisonment, and everything else, it's not much, but... Mara looked in the bag, saw the gleam of gold coins. I don't want... Take it. Morrison insisted. The town needs to make this right. It's not charity, it's justice. She looked at Asher, who nodded slightly. Thank you, she said finally. I hope Hollow Bend can heal now. Thanks to you. We've got a chance. Morrison replaced his hat. You're always welcome here. Both of you, I mean that. As he walked away, Mara hefted the bag. There must be $100 here. Enough to buy some good breeding stock, Asher said thoughtfully. Start building that ranch properly. Our ranch, Mara corrected, and was rewarded with one of his rare, full smiles. They rode out as the sun touched the horizon, taking the familiar trail back to the cabin. But everything felt different now. The shadow that had hung over them was gone. Justice had been served. The truth had been told. Asher, Mara said as they climbed into the foothills. What Morrison said about me always being welcome in Hollow Bend. You thinking of going back? His voice was carefully neutral. No. She urged her mare closer to Storm, close enough to reach out and touch his hand. I'm thinking I never want to live in a town again. I'm thinking I want to stay in that cabin, raise cattle and horses, maybe add another room or two. Sounds like you're thinking long-term. I am, she squeezed his hand. If you are. He pulled Storm to a stop, turned to face her fully, in the dying light. His gray eyes were warm as summer rain. Mara Callan, I've been thinking long-term since the day you smiled at me over those shooting lessons. Just thinking, she teased, feeling lighter than she had in years. Well, a man doesn't want to presume. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. But if you're asking what I think you're asking, I'm asking if you want to make this partnership official, in every way. Is that a proposal? The second one I've made to you, she reminded him. Are you going to make me ask a third time? Instead of answering with words, he leaned across the space between their horses and kissed her. Different from that public kiss in town, this one was just for them, full of promise and passion and the freedom of two people choosing each other without reservation. When they finally made it back to the cabin, Miguel was waiting with supper and a knowing grin. So, the bad sheriff, he goes to prison. He does, Asher confirmed. Justice was served. Bueno, this calls for tequila. The old man produced a dusty bottle from somewhere. To celebrate justice, and maybe something else, eh? As they sat around the table, sharing the meal and the story of the trial, Mara felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten its name, peace. Not just the absence of fear, but real peace, the kind that comes from being exactly where you're meant to be, with exactly who you're meant to be with. Later, as Miguel headed to his own cabin still singing victory songs in Spanish, Mara stood on the porch looking up at the stars. Asher came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. No regrets, he asked softly. None, she said, leaning back against him. For the first time in my life, I have no regrets at all. The small cafe in Hollow Bend had only been open a month, but already it was becoming a gathering place for the women of the town. Run by the Gonzalez family in what used to be the old assay office, it served simple food and strong coffee, but more importantly, it provided a space where people felt safe to talk. Mara sat at a corner table, her coffee cooling as she watched the morning bustle outside. She'd come to town for supplies, but Mrs. Henderson had caught her at the Mercantile and practically dragged her here. I still can't believe you're staying. Mrs. Henderson said for the third time, clutching her own cup like a lifeline. After everything that happened. The sheriff's gone, Mara reminded her gently. His son too, Morrison's doing a fine job. Why would I leave now? But the memories are just that, memories. Mara smiled. I've got better things to think about now. The ranch is doing well. We've got a dozen head of cattle, some good horses. Miguel's teaching me about breeding stock. Mary Patterson approached their table, still shy but no longer the frightened girl who'd fired that shot in the square. Miss Mara, could I talk to you? Of course. Sit. Mary glanced at Mrs., Henderson, who immediately started to rise. Please stay, Mary said quickly. I think we all need to stop keeping secrets. She sat down, folded her hands carefully. I wanted to thank you, not just for what you did that day, but for showing me that we don't have to be afraid anymore. You showed yourself that, Mara corrected. You're the one who spoke up. After you did, you gave me courage. Mary took a breath. I'm leaving Hollow Bend. There's a teaching position in Denver, and I've applied for it. My father's not happy, but it's your life, Mara finished. Good for you. That's just it. I wouldn't have thought that way before. None of us would. Mary looked around the cafe, at the other women talking freely, laughing even. You changed things. We all changed things, Mara said firmly. Every person who spoke up that day. Change doesn't come from one person. It comes from people deciding together that enough is enough. The cafe door opened, bringing a gust of cool air, and Sam Chen. He nodded respectfully to their table, then surprised them all by approaching. Ladies, he said, hat in hand. Miss Mara, I wonder if I might have a word. Certainly. He shifted uncomfortably. I wanted you to know my family back in San Francisco. They've heard about what happened here, about how you stood up, how the town stood with you. They want to send more family members out here, maybe open more businesses. Mara blinked in surprise. That's wonderful, but why tell me? Because they wouldn't have considered it before. Too dangerous. They said, too much prejudice. But when they heard how people here finally stood up for what's right, he smiled. You didn't just free yourself, Miss Mara. You freed all of us. After he left, the three women sat in contemplative silence. Finally, Mrs. Henderson spoke. I've been thinking about expanding the boarding house. Maybe adding a section just for women traveling alone. Somewhere they'd feel safe. That's a wonderful idea, Mara said warmly. I got the idea from you, actually. The way Mr. Holt gave you sanctuary without making it conditional, made me realize how few places there are where women can just be safe. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Father Miguel, the priest, who'd become something of a regular at the cafe despite some grumbling from more conservative parishioners. Ladies, he greeted them. Miss Mara, I was hoping to find you. I have a letter. Mara took it, puzzled. The return address was from a law firm in Santa Fe. She opened it, read quickly, then read again more slowly. What is it? Mary asked anxiously. Mara had to clear her throat. It's from a lawyer representing several women in Santa Fe. They heard about the trial, about what happened here. They want to know if I'll come speak to a group they're forming, a sort of society for women's protection and mutual aid. Will you go, Mrs.? Henderson asked. Mara folded the letter carefully. I need to talk to Asher, but yes, I think I will. If we can help other towns stand up the way Hollow Bend did. When you go, Mary said suddenly. Could I come with you if I'm going to be a teacher? I should learn about things like this. And me, Mrs. Henderson added, surprising everyone, including herself. I'm tired of being afraid, tired of being quiet. Father Miguel smiled. This is how real change happens, not all at once, but person by person, town by town. They talked for another hour, making plans, sharing ideas. When Mara finally left to finish her errands, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. At the Mercantile, she found Mr. Peterson eager to help, almost embarrassingly so. As he measured out flour and wrapped her purchases, he kept shooting her nervous glances. Something on your mind, Mr. Peterson. He stopped, started again. I wanted to apologize. For that day, I should have spoken up. A man's supposed to protect women, not stand by while they're mistreated. We all make choices based on what we think we can survive, Mara said gently. What matters is what we do going forward. Yes, ma'am. That's why I wanted you to know. I've joined Morrison's new citizen committee. We're working on new town ordinances, making sure nothing like that can happen again. As she loaded her purchases onto her mare, Mara noticed more changes. The saloon had a new sign, "No firearms inside." The bank had posted notices about fair lending practices. Small changes, but significant ones. She was just mounting up when she saw a familiar figure riding in. Asher, on Storm, leading a beautiful paint mare. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, swinging down. "Miguel said you'd come for supplies." "What's this?" She indicated the paint mare. "Wedding present. From Morrison and the town council." His gray eyes were warm with amusement. "Seems news of our engagement has spread." "But we're not—" She stopped, seeing the look in his eyes. "Asher Holt, are you proposing to me in the middle of Main Street?" "Seems appropriate, doesn't it? This is where everything started." He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band. "I've been carrying this around for a week, trying to find the right moment. Then I realized, with you, every moment is the right one." The street had gone quiet around them. People were watching from doorways and windows. But Mara didn't care. All she could see was this man who'd given her freedom and then given her a reason to stay. "You know," she said softly, "traditionally, the man is supposed to ask." "You want traditional now?" He grinned. "All right then." To her shock and the town's delight, he went down on one knee right there in the dusty street. "Mara Callan, you've turned my life upside down in all the best ways. You've brought light back to a home that was full of shadows. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, not caring that her eyes were wet. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, stood and kissed her soundly while the town erupted in cheers. Even Morrison came out of the sheriff's office to clap. "When?" she asked when they broke apart. "Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next month, next year. I just want to know you're mine and I'm yours." "Next month," she decided. "Here in Hollow Bend. Let the town that tried to break us see us joined." "You sure?" She looked around at the faces watching them, most smiling, all touched by witnessing something good after so much bad. "I'm sure. This town is different now. We're all different. And I want to be married in front of the people who found their courage when I found mine." They rode home together, leading the paint mare, talking about plans. A real wedding. Not just a quick ceremony. Guests from neighboring ranches. A dress from Mrs. Rodriguez. A feast with Miguel's whole extended family. "Oh," Mara said suddenly, remembering. "I got a letter. There are women in Santa Fe who want me to come speak about what happened here. Will you?" "I'd like to, if you don't mind." He reached over, took her hand. "Mara, you're going to be my wife, not my prisoner. If you want to help other women find their voices, then that's what you should do." "You really mean that?" "Have I ever said anything to you I didn't mean?" She thought about it. No, you haven't." "Don't plan on starting now." As they crested the ridge above the cabin, the sun was setting, painting their valley in shades of gold and rose. The cabin looked welcoming with smoke rising from the chimney. Miguel must have started supper. "Asher," Mara said suddenly, "I just realized I don't know where I want to go for our wedding trip. I've been so focused on staying, on fighting, on surviving. I never thought about where I'd actually want to go." "We've got time to figure it out," he said easily. "Maybe nowhere, maybe everywhere. As long as we're together. Does it matter?" She looked at him, this man who'd saved her without trapping her, who'd given her shelter and then given her wings. "No," she said softly. "It doesn't matter at all." They rode down to their cabin, their ranch, their home. Tomorrow there would be wedding plans and ranch work and maybe another trip to town. But tonight, there was just them and the vast New Mexico sky and the promise of all the days to come. And for Mara Callan, soon to be Mara Holt, that was exactly enough. The evening was perfect, one of those rare high desert nights where the temperature was just right. The stars seemed close enough to touch, and the whole world felt hushed and waiting. The cabin glowed with lamplight, and Mara could hear the soft strumming of Miguel's guitar drifting from where he sat with his nephews near the corral. Tomorrow, she would marry Asher in front of half the territory, it seemed, but tonight was just theirs. She stood at her window, Jenny's window, really, though she'd made it her own these past months. The silver brush lay on the dresser, and she'd used it to brush out her long dark hair until it shone. She wore a simple white nightgown Mrs. Rodriguez had made as part of her trousseau, delicate with tiny embroidered flowers along the neckline. A soft knock at her door made her heart skip. "Mara," Asher's voice, quiet and careful as always. "Come in." He opened the door but stayed on the threshold, taking in the sight of her by lamplight. He'd cleaned up from the day's work, his dark hair still damp, wearing a fresh shirt and trousers. The way he looked at her, like she was something precious and strong all at once, still made her breath catch. "I wanted to talk to you," he said, "before tomorrow, before we're surrounded by people." She moved to sit on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her. He crossed the room, sat close but not quite touching. Even now, on the eve of their wedding, he was careful with her. It was one of the 1,000 things she loved about him. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "About marrying you, no." His smile was soft in the lamplight. "About standing up in front of all those people, making speeches, dancing terrified." She laughed, the sound filling the small room like music. The great Asher Holt, who faced down Sheriff Garrett and his guns, afraid of dancing. A man's got to know his limitations. He grew serious then, turning to face her fully. "Mara, I need you to know something. Tomorrow, when Father Miguel asks if I take you as my wife, I'll say yes with my whole heart, but I need you to know that in my mind. You've been my partner since the day you picked up that rifle and ran toward danger because you thought I might need help." "Only your partner," she teased gently. "My partner, my love, my reason for believing the world can be good again." He took her hands, ran his thumbs over her knuckles. "But I also need you to know that after tomorrow, nothing changes between us. You'll still be free to go where you want, do what you want, be who you want. Being my wife doesn't mean being less yourself." "I know." She freed one hand to touch his face. "That's why I can marry you, because you've never tried to cage me." "Never will," he promised. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Mara spoke. "I've been thinking about Jenny." He tensed slightly, but didn't pull away. "What about her?" "I think she'd be happy, seeing her brother not alone anymore, seeing her home full of life again." She gestured around the room. "I've kept some of her things, but I've made it mine too. Is that all right?" "It's perfect." His voice was thick. "She would have loved you, you know, would have pestered you with questions, borrowed your clothes, tried to teach you her terrible cooking. Her cooking was terrible. Awful. She could burn water." He smiled at the memory. "But she'd try so hard. I ate a lot of charred biscuits and pretended they were delicious." "That's love," Mara said softly. "Yes," he agreed, looking at her. "It is." The guitar music drifted through the window, joined now by soft singing in Spanish. The night breeze carried the scent of sage and the last of the season's wildflowers. "Asher," Mara said suddenly, "I want to choose this. Choose you. Choose us. Not tomorrow in front of everyone, but tonight, here, now." His breath caught. "Mara." "I've spent my whole life having choices taken from me," she continued, "being told what I could and couldn't do, who I could and couldn't be. Even that day in the square, it was all about other people's choices, other people's power." She stood, moved to stand between his knees, her hands resting on his shoulders. But this is my choice. Free and clear, not because you saved me, not because I need protection, not because it's expected, because I love you, because I want to build a life with you, because for the first time in my life, I'm choosing my own future. His hands settled on her waist, warm through the thin fabric. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He stood slowly, giving her time to change her mind, to step back, but she didn't. Instead, she reached up, pulled the pins from her hair one by one, letting it fall around her shoulders like a dark curtain. My choice, she said firmly. Your choice, he agreed, and kissed her. It was different from their other kisses, deeper, hungrier, full of promise. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said, the words rough with emotion. I think I have since that day you smiled over those shooting lessons. First real smile I'd seen from you. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have since you gave me a gun instead of a cage. He lifted her gently, carried her the few steps to the bed, set her down like she was made of spun glass, then laughed when she pulled him down beside her with decidedly more force. I'm not fragile, she reminded him. No, he agreed, brushing her hair back from her face. You're the strongest person I know. The lamp burned low as they discovered each other, gentle and passionate by turns. Outside, Miguel's guitar had gone silent. The night settled into peaceful quiet. Inside, two people who'd been alone too long finally, truly, came home. Later, as they lay entwined in the narrow bed, Mara traced patterns on Asher's chest by the dim lamplight. No regrets, she asked, echoing his question from weeks before. Only one, he said, and she tensed until he continued. I regret we waited this long. She laughed, the sound muffled against his shoulder. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Everyone watching us, knowing. Let them know. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Let them see that sometimes. Good things happen. That sometimes love wins. Love wins, she repeated softly. I like that. The lamp finally guttered out, leaving them in darkness lit only by starlight through the window. Mara felt herself drifting towards sleep, safe in the circle of Asher's arms. When he spoke again, Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For choosing me, for choosing us, for being brave enough to stay when running would have been easier. She found his face in the darkness, kissed him soft and sweet. Thank you for being worth staying for. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the night air cool on their skin. Tomorrow would bring a wedding, guests, celebration. Tomorrow they'd stand before God and the town and make public what they just made private. But tonight was theirs alone, a choice freely made, a love freely given, a future freely chosen. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, finding them still entwined, Mara woke to find Asher watching her with wonder in his eyes. Good morning, almost wife, he murmured. Good morning, almost husband, she replied, stretching against him like a cat. How do you feel? She considered the question. How did she feel for so long? She'd felt trapped, hunted, alone, but now... Free, she said finally. I feel free. Good, he said, pulling her close. That's how you should always feel. From outside came the sound of Miguel starting the morning chores, singing cheerfully off-key. Soon the cabin would fill with people. Mrs. Rodriguez with the wedding dress, Mary Patterson and Mrs. Henderson to help her prepare, half of Hollow Bend arriving early to help set up. But for now, for these last few precious moments, it was just them. Mara Callan and Asher Holt, soon to be husband and wife, two souls who'd found each other in the harsh beauty of the desert, who'd fought for each other and with each other, who'd chosen love over fear. Ready for this? Asher asked as voices began calling from the yard. Yes, Mara said, sitting up and reaching for her wrapper. For the first time in my life, I'm ready for everything. And she was ready for the wedding, ready for the marriage, ready for whatever came next. Because she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that love wasn't a cage or a debt or a demand. Love was a choice, and she chose Asher Holt, today and always. The door burst open and Miguel appeared with coffee and a huge grin. Buenos dias. Today we make a wedding, today love wins. Yes, Mara agreed, accepting the coffee and smiling at her soon-to-be husband over the rim. Today, love wins. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope it touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I love connecting with listeners from around the world and hearing your thoughts about these tales of courage and romance from the American frontier. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover these stories of love triumphing over adversity in the Old West. Until next time, partners.